Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a really tough case today, one that really gripped Sweden back in 2008. It's the disappearance of a young girl, 10-year-old Engle Hoglund.
It's a case with so many layers to it. It's not just about the crime itself, but about all the things that went wrong, the missed opportunities, the impact on the community. It's a lot to unpack.
And to do that, we've got court transcripts, news reports, even a true crime podcast episode that really digs deep. We want to understand how this case exposed those cracks in the justice system, right? The things that maybe could have been done differently.
And then there's this whole other element to it, this link to a cold case from 8 years before. It just makes everything that much more complicated and honestly even more tragic.
Right. So let's set the scene. We're in Stjärnsund, Sweden. It's a small village, very picturesque. It's April 5th, 2008, a Saturday. Ingla's biking home from soccer practice. Just a typical day for her, a normal routine.
And she even calls her mom, Karina, on the way, just like she promised. That kind of detail really makes it hit home, right? How this could happen to anyone.
Absolutely. And then suddenly, she's gone. Vanishes. Karina, understandably, is frantic. She retraces Engla's route, finds her abandoned bike near this wooded path.
And the community, they really come together. Huge search parties, everyone's looking. But as the hours turn into days, that hope starts to fade.
But then there's this crazy break in the case. A tourist who was taking pictures that day just happened to capture Engle riding her bike. And in those same photos, minutes before she disappears.
A red car. A suspicious red car trailing behind her.
Wow.
And to add to that, an eyewitness saw that same car nearby, parked, with a man inside smoking a cigarette. That tiny detail, it turns out, becomes really important later on.
So the police track down the owner of the red car, a man named Anders Eklund, and right away he becomes the prime suspect. But when they start looking into his past, it's chilling.
It's not just a coincidence, This guy has a history of violence against women and girls. Assault, attempted rape, sexual harassment. It's all there in his record.
And the crazy thing is, the authorities had actually assessed him before and labeled him as low risk for reoffending. It makes you wonder, what does it even take to be considered high risk in their eyes?
Seriously, what criteria are they even using? It's a huge red flag, This case really shows how those risk assessments can be so flawed.
So on top of his real-life crimes, the investigation uncovers this whole other side to Eklund, his online activity.
Yeah, he was active in these chat rooms, targeting young people, creating this whole fake persona, lying about his age, his appearance, everything. Classic predator behavior.
So the police finally catch up to Eklund, hundreds of kilometers away from Stjärnsund. They search his apartment and, well, it's not good. Pornography, women's underwear, disturbing images of children.
It becomes clear that they're dealing with someone deeply disturbed, someone dangerous.
But even with all this evidence piling up, Eklund denies everything. Says he had nothing to do with Engle's disappearance. That is, until the DNA evidence comes back.
And that's where things take a sharp turn. They find out that Eklund's DNA matches the unsolved murder of 31-year-old Pernilla Hellgrenn, a case from 2000. 8 years this case had gone cold.
Can you imagine what Pernilla's family must have been going through? Years of unanswered questions, and then suddenly this potential break in the case, but it's tied to this other horrific event.
And here's the really frustrating part. It turns out Eklund's DNA was already on file from a previous offense. They could have potentially connected him to Pernilla's murder years earlier.
Wow. Had they done their job properly back then, this whole thing, it might have played out so differently.
It's a devastating thought. Pernilla might still be alive. And Engle?
Engle might still be alive. This just adds this whole other layer of tragedy and injustice to everything.
So, with this DNA evidence staring him in the face, Eklund, he finally cracks, confesses to both murders. But then he tries to spin these stories, Like he wants to downplay his responsibility.
He's trying to rewrite what happened, even though the evidence is right there.
Exactly. Like with Pernilla's death, he claims that, get this, she propositioned him and that it was all an accident. But the forensics completely contradict his story.
And his version of Engle's murder, it's just as messed up. He tries to make himself out to be the victim, saying that she kicked him and that's what set him off, like he lost control.
That's that classic abuser tactic, right? Shifting the blame, trying to get people to feel sorry for him. But again, the evidence doesn't back him up at all.
The trial starts in July 2008. And man, it's emotionally charged, you can imagine. I mean, the evidence against Eklund is overwhelming. The DNA, the eyewitnesses, his own confessions.
And yet, even with all that, he and his defense team keep trying to play the victim card. He blames his evil side, whatever that means, And then his lawyer pulls out this bizarre tactic, quoting from this famous short story.
The one about the driver accidentally hitting a child.
Yeah, like that's somehow comparable to what Eklund did. It's just
It
strange.
felt so off, right? Like they were trying to draw this parallel between a tragic accident and these calculated, brutal acts that Eklund
It
committed.
was really unsettling. And
That's
it totally backfired. You could feel the anger in the courtroom.
And it's Engle's mother, Karina, who just, she can't hold it in anymore. When she hears that comparison, she just erupts. You could feel the raw grief and anger pouring out of her.
It must have been agonizing for her, sitting through that trial, listening to them try to minimize what he did.
Thankfully, the jury sees right through it. The verdict comes quickly. Guilty on all counts. Eklund is sentenced to life in prison.
So justice, legally speaking, is served. But Engle's case, it goes so much deeper than just one man's conviction. It really exposes the systemic failures that allowed him to be free to do this in the first place.
And this is where it gets really, well, frustrating. Remember that list of known violent sex offenders we were talking about?
The one with like over 1,200 names on it.
Anders Eklund was number 21 on that list. And get this, the eyewitness from Pernilla's murder had given a description that matched him perfectly.
It's mind-boggling, right? They had the DNA, the eyewitness, and even a tip from someone who'd seen Eklund on TV, but they just dismissed it.
It's like, how many red flags did they need? It makes you wonder, could Engle's death have been prevented?
That's the question that just hangs over this whole case. What if they had just investigated him properly? What if they'd taken those warnings seriously?
Engle's family, I mean, understandably, they were outraged. They sued the Swedish government for the police negligence, but sadly, the lawsuit was unsuccessful. The court decided the link between the two murders was too distant to hold the police accountable.
A lot of people felt like that decision just added insult to injury, you know? It raised those bigger questions about accountability in the justice system and whether they're really prioritizing people's safety.
It's like if you have a known violent sex offender on your radar, how can you not investigate them thoroughly when a murder happens?
It sends this really disturbing message like process and bureaucracy are more important than people's lives. And in this case, that failure had these horrific consequences.
Engle's case, it had a profound impact on Sweden. Her funeral was a national event, this massive outpouring of grief, and also this demand for change.
It really forced the nation to confront this uncomfortable truth, that even in a country like Sweden, known for its safety net, these things can happen. And the system that's supposed to protect people, it can fail.
We've covered the crime, the trial, the systemic failures, but what about the human cost? How do you even begin to heal from something like this?
That's what we'll look at next, the impact on the victims' families and their strength in the face of this unimaginable loss.
It's hard to even fathom the pain that Engle's family has gone through. Karina, her mom, she described her grief in one interview, and it's heartbreaking. She said it was like this physical ache so deep that she couldn't even cry.
You get a sense of just how profound their suffering is. And Engle's older sister, Sol, she was only 11 at the time. Losing your sibling like that, your playmate, it's a wound that never truly heals.
Sol has talked about how a part of her died with Engle, like a part of her childhood, her future, was just ripped away.
It's devastating. But in the face of this horrific tragedy, both Karina and Sol have shown incredible resilience. They've taken their pain and turned it into action, becoming advocates for other victims of crime.
Karina especially, she's been so vocal about the need for change in the justice system. She's fighting for victims' rights, demanding accountability for those failures that allowed this to happen.
She's been really open about her own journey through grief, too. The struggles, the anger, the constant search for meaning. She even expressed this desire to confront Eklund face to face.
She wanted answers, right? To understand why, to maybe regain some sense of control in a situation where she felt completely powerless.
Exactly. But Eklund, he's refused her request for a meeting. He's still in prison, and it seems like he's unwilling to face the consequences of his actions, let alone engage with the pain he's caused.
It's like another layer of injustice, you know? He takes Engle's life, and then he denies her family even a sliver of closure or understanding.
It highlights how, even when the legal process is over, true healing and peace can be so much more difficult to find.
And Engle's case, it didn't just impact her family. The whole community of Schönson was shaken to its core. It shattered that sense of security, that image of this safe, peaceful village.
But even in their grief, they showed incredible strength. Remember those early days after Engle disappeared? Everyone came together. They searched tirelessly, supported the family throughout the trial and beyond.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, human connection and compassion can really shine through.
And over the years, Stjernson has really worked to honor Engle's memory. They started a foundation in her name to support children and families affected by violence.
And at the spot where her bike was found, they placed a statue of an angel. Such a poignant reminder of the innocence that was lost.
It's a symbol of hope, resilience, but also a reminder of the work that still needs to be done to protect children.
This case, it's so complex, it makes us think about justice, about how we assess risk, about the responsibility we have to one another.
It can feel overwhelming, the darkness of it all, but there are glimmers of hope, lessons we can learn, actions we can take.
So what are some of those key takeaways? What can we learn from all of this?
Well, one thing that really jumps out is this need to challenge assumptions. Remember how Eklund was deemed low risk, despite all those red flags in his past? This case shows how flawed those risk assessment tools can be and why we need to keep improving them.
Makes you wonder, are we doing enough to identify potential offenders? What more could we be doing to prevent these tragedies from happening?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We need to keep evaluating those tools, make sure they're based on solid research, and that they're actually being applied effectively. Remember, Eklund's DNA was already in the system.
But it wasn't acted on. It shows how even with the right tools, human error and those systemic oversights can have devastating consequences.
This case also highlights the importance of community vigilance. We can't just rely on law enforcement to keep us safe. We all have a responsibility to look out for one another. Think about that TV viewer who called in the tip about Eklund. What if that had been taken more seriously?
It's like that saying, if you see something, say something. We need to create a culture where people feel comfortable reporting suspicious behavior,
Yeah,
where it's seen as a collective responsibility to protect each other.
absolutely. And we can never forget the victims. Karina and Sul's strength and resilience, it's truly inspiring. They become powerful advocates, raising awareness and fighting for better support for families affected by violence.
That advocacy work is so important. It reminds us that even though the legal process might end, the healing process for victims and families, it goes on.
And true justice, it involves more than just punishment. It's about providing support, resources, and a platform for victims to share their stories and advocate for change.
Engle's story, it's a stark reminder of the darkness that exists in the world, but it also shows the power of human resilience, the importance of community, and the hope for a better future.
It's a call to action for all of us, to examine our own roles in creating a safer, more just society, whether it's advocating for policy changes, supporting victims' organizations, or just being more vigilant and compassionate in our own communities. We all have a part to play.
As we wrap up this deep dive, let's remember those lessons we've learned, those questions we've raised, and that commitment to making a difference. Engle's story may have ended tragically, but her legacy can live on through the positive changes we make in her memory.
Let's honor her memory by working toward a world where all children can grow up free from fear, where justice prevails, and where communities come together to support and protect one another.